In this lecture, we're going to be looking at interactionism. Now, you may sometimes see this referred to as social action theories, as it's a combination of a number of different social theories and views on society, but they tend to be cumulative in nature. They've kind of built upon each other, and they kind of add in to what each other have to say. So we're going to look at some of them. We're going to look at social action theory, symbolic interactionism, phenomenology, and ethnomethodology. We're going to see what their views of society and human behaviour are and evaluate their usefulness in understanding society. But to start off with, we need to look at what interactionism is. And interactionism is a set of theories that is almost the opposite to the theories that we have studied so far in structural approaches. So, as I said, they are a combination of different theories, but where they are similar is that they believe that social structures such as gender, ethnicity, etc., are social constructions. They are created by society rather than being biologically determined or biologically or organically created. They also believe in voluntarism, the idea that we have free will and agency to make choices about our lives and form our own identities, rather than the determinism of the structural approaches where our identities are dictated by social institutions such as family, religion, education, etc. The other way that they're different from the structural approaches is they are a micro approach. So their focus is on small groups or individuals within society rather than the society as a whole. It's acknowledging the fact that there are separate groups within a society rather than a homogeneous whole. And they believe that behaviour is driven by beliefs, meanings, and feelings rather than social institutions and social structures. They do accept that there is a power to social institutions and social structures, and we'll look at that in a minute, but they believe that our identities, our cultures, our ways of life are driven by our interpretations of meanings, beliefs, and feelings. And it's all shaped around our interactions with each other. The other way they differ from structural theories is that they tend to use the interpretivist methodology. Now, just to be clear here, and we will look at this in more detail later, but interpretivism is a way of conducting research, so it's methodological, whereas interactionism is a theory of society, so it's theoretical. So where the structural approaches use positivist methodologies, so that interactionists use interpretivist methodologies. So interpretivism and interactionism are not the same thing. So let's look at our first theory of interactionism, and that's social action theory. And this is the work of Max Weber. And Weber believed that in order to fully understand society, it's not enough to just look at the structures and institutions of a society. You actually need to look at the meaning behind the behaviours and behind the actions of a society and why people do the things that they do. So here kind of is a midway point, if you like, between the fully interactionist approaches and the structural approaches. So Weber said there were 3 levels of sociological explanation. The first being structural causes. And we'll go into more detail on these in a minute. Then he talks about Verstehen, and I'm probably horribly mispronouncing that as I don't speak German or Austrian. And the final is social actions. So Weber believed that in order to fully understand society, you need to look at both the cause of behavior, so the structural factors that shape people's behavior, but also the meaning, the subjective meaning behind the behavior. So the meanings that individuals attach to their actions. So what does that mean in reality, in theory? So when talking about the structural causes, what Weber is talking about is changes in social structures that can change people's worldview and therefore their behaviour. And an example he used here is Calvinism, and in his book, The Protestant Work Ethic. So what he said was that when the Protestant Reformation introduced a new belief system, Calvinism, this changed people's worldview and therefore their behaviour. And it did this because it changed how people viewed their jobs and their ways of life. Protestantism is an ascetic, can't say this word, asceticism based religion, meaning that it's about you work for the blessing of God, not for the money, and therefore you're putting your money back into your business and back into your industry to develop that business and that industry, and therefore you don't need worldly material goods. And this is almost the opposite to the capitalist system that had been developing at this point, because it's saying that if you believe in God, if you take our belief system, you don't need material goods. And this kind of made your employment and your work the glorification of God. And when people took on this new religion, so a change in a social structure, the social structure of religion, it changed their way of viewing the world, moving away from materialism and material goods. But that's not enough to understand a society. The next element you need to take into account is what he referred to as Verstehen. And then this literally means empathy, or putting yourself into the shoes of another. So in order to understand the cause of the change, you have to understand the meaning behind it. You have to put yourself into the situation that your participants are in so you can experience what they experience. Now, Weber identified two types of Verstehen, and I'm going to horribly mispronounce these. Ectulies Verstehen, which is understanding something through direct observation. So this is linking into that interpretivist approach. And Hilariendes Verstehen, which is about the empathy and the understanding behind the behavior. So you need to experience the behavior to fully understand it. And then we get to his last element, which is social actions. So these are things that we do. The actions are what we do in life, and social actions are how societies work. And Weber said that in any society you can understand a society, you can categorize all the behaviors into one of these four types of action. So these are the reasons why we do what we do. So the first one he talked about was instrumental action, or instrumental rational action. And this is where you do something, you behave in a way that is the most efficient way to achieve a goal. So your action is the most efficient way to achieve whatever your ultimate goal is. So for example, The most efficient way to make profit for your business is to pay low wages. That would be an instrumental rational action. Okay. The next type of action he talks about is value rational action. And this is where the behavior or the action towards a goal is seen as desirable for its own sake. It is something you do because it's seen as desirable rather than achieving an ultimate goal. And yes, it may have a goal attached to it, but that goal is so far away that you're unlikely to actually experience it. So the example that Weber gives is believing in God and completing the rituals associated with that belief system in order to reach salvation. Now, you're never going to know if you're going to reach salvation, because salvation comes after you've passed away. But you still do all the things that you need to do in order to believe that you are going to achieve salvation. The next type of action is traditional action, and these are things that we do out of habits. It's the kind of attitude of we've always done it this way. So it's routine, it's customary, it's traditional, and you kind of do it without even thinking about it. There is an element of choice there, but the choice is so ingrained that you don't even think about it. So things like putting up a Christmas tree. It's a traditional action. People do it without really thinking about it. Oh, it's Christmas time, let's put up the tree. It's something you do out of habit. Sunday roasts are another traditional action. There's no reason not to have a roast on any other day of the week, but it becomes habit and routine within families, within communities, within societies to sit down on a Sunday lunchtime and have a roast dinner. The last type of action is effectual action, and this is action that expresses emotion. Weber saw this as important in religious and political movements as charismatic leaders who attracted followers based on their emotional appeal. And what he meant by this emotional appeal is that you are acting without really thinking about anything. You are just reacting almost. So things like crying in grief, violence caused by anger, the action can be linked back to an emotional state. So to understand society, you need to kind of understand the reasoning behind the behavior. So if you can understand why somebody does something or why society does something in a certain way, and you can link it to the structural causes, the changes in social structures, you get a fuller understanding of society. However, if we look at the evaluation on this, the first comes from Alfred Schutz. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. Alfred Schutz said that Weber's view of action is too individualistic, and it doesn't explain the shared nature of the meanings. So it's saying we have these shared meanings, but it doesn't say where they come from or why we share these meanings. For example, a student raising their hand in class, they mean they have a question or an answer. But Weber doesn't explain how the teacher and everybody else in the room knows that that's what the student means. We know that that's what they mean, but Weber's theory doesn't explain how we know what this means. The other problem is application. It is open to interpretation. So where one person sees an action being instrumental, another may see it as being traditional, or something that's seen as effectual may be seen as value rational. And we can see this in the Tokopia tribe, where they have the tradition of if visiting another island, they take a gift with them. And this could be seen as a traditional action because it's something they've always done. However, it could also be seen as an instrumental rational action because it's creating goodwill between the two tribes in order to facilitate trade or facilitate diplomacy in some way. It could also be considered a value rational action because it's just seen as good manners to take a gift. And we still do these things in Western world as well. When you go to dinner at somebody's house, you may take a gift with you to say thank you for the dinner you have yet to have. And finally, the idea of verstehen. Verstehen is impossible to truly get. You cannot experience exactly what somebody else is experiencing because our experiences are the accumulation of our histories. How one person reacts to a situation will be different to somebody else based upon their previous experiences and based upon their own life history. So we can try and get verstehen, but we'll never fully achieve it. So this leads us on to symbolic interactionism, which kind of tried to build on Weber's ideas. Symbolic interactionism essentially means that it's the understanding, the study of how people interact with each other and interpret symbols, which are words, gestures, objects, expressions, body language, that we all place meaning on. So it's studying how we are able to live within a society with shared meanings based around these symbols. And one of the key proponents of symbolic interactionists is Herbert Bulmer, something like that. And he said that the key principles of this symbolic interactionism is that actions are based on the meanings that we give situations, events, and people. So the way that we act, the way that we respond, is based on the meaning that we attach to that. And the meanings are based on our prior interactions and experiences, meaning that we react based upon that life history that I spoke about before. So, for example, if somebody shakes a fist at you, if your prior experience in life may lead to you interpreting that shaking of a fist in different ways. You may see it as a violent action. You may see it as somebody getting excited about a sporting event or a concert or something like that. It may be an expression of excitement. But your reaction, your action, will be based upon your prior experiences and prior interactions with others to that particular symbol. And he also said that the meanings are fluid and negotiable. Our meanings will change as we learn more, as we interact with people more. So it's a constant learning process. There isn't a one and done, if you like. And part of the way that we learn these or build these interactions and experiences is by what G.H. Mead referred to as taking on the role of others. Now, this is kind of one of the key ideas of this. So it's also referred to as the interpretivist procedure. So what G.H. Mead was saying, when we take on the role of others, we put ourselves in the place of others and see ourselves as others see us. And this starts from a very young age when we use imitative play, where we start to see ourselves as others who are significant to us. We start playing mummies and daddies. We copy what we see our parents doing, and this is one of the things that I see a lot with my young niece and nephew. I remember my sister sending me a video of my niece pretending to be on a business call on her toy laptop, copying what she had seen my sister doing when she was working. And this helps people to see what it's like, building that verstehen, if you like, of others and learning how to react to situations. And so there is this interpretive phase. There is a process which is milliseconds in length. It's almost instantaneous, where we experience the stimulus and then we react to it. And that millisecond in between is where we kind of go, right, so they've done that. This is how I need to now react. So, and play is a safe way for children to learn those reactions, because it's not real, it's role play. Okay. But this idea of understanding how others see us and our behaviour links into our next key concept, which is Cooley and the looking glass self. And my favourite quote of I am not who I think I am not who you think I am who I think you think I am. And what that means is that the person we present to the world is a combination of how a person sees the world seeing them. Okay, now that sounds really complicated, but we present to the world this idea of who we are, and when we get a negative reaction to that, we change. So if people don't like the way that we are presenting ourselves and they give us a negative reaction, we will change sometimes that element of ourselves in order to appear better to different people. So our present self, the one that we put forward, is a combination of ourselves and the reactions that others have had towards us. And that leads us into labeling theory. Okay, labeling theory will come up many times during the course of this course. And labeling theory originally came or started with W.I. Thomas. And another quote that I quite like is, if we believe something to be true, we will behave as if it is true. So Thomas said that the definition of something is its label. And therefore, people will label situations, events, and people which can have real world consequences, meaning that we will place labels onto things, people, situations, in order to categorize them and help us to learn how to respond to them. And this can have real world consequences because it's as we've categorized things, as we've labeled them, we will respond in certain ways. So it's almost like each and every experience that we have with a person, with a situation, with a scenario gets filed away under certain whatever categories there are, and that will then kind of go, well, that's in that category, so this is how I need to respond. Now, again, that kind of thought process is almost instantaneous. It's nanoseconds in length, but it allows us to make sense of the world, make sense of all of the input that is coming at us in terms of our experiences, our situations, our personal interactions, and know this is how we respond. And the process of labeling, from identification to the label being attached, the acceptance or rejection of the label, and the creation of a master status, is all processing. And that label may instantaneously create a master status, which is when you take that label, internalize it to the point where it becomes who you are or what you are. So an example could be a teacher who labels a student as being troublesome, as causing problems, disruptive, not academically able. That teacher then treats that student according to that label. Now, that student can choose to reject the label and say, that's not me, I'm not behaving that way, or they can accept it and internalize it, which leads to a self-fulfilling prophecy, where that student then acts up to that label because they have said, well, that's what you think, that's who I am. So again, if we believe the label to be true, we will behave as if it is true. And that links us into our last concept of symbolic interactionism, which is the dramaturgical model, which comes from Goffman. And the dramaturgical model suggests this is about how we present ourselves to the world. Now, Goffman said that we have two selves, if you like. We wear masks all the time. Now, our front stage self is the masks that we wear in front of other people. It's the roles that we have that shape our behavior. And we spend most of our lives in this front stage self. Anytime we are around others, we have an aim on a mask, whether that be the mask of teacher, student, daughter, husband, wife, crazy cat lady. It doesn't matter. There's always at least one of those masks on. And the only time we are our true self is when we are alone. When we are 100% alone, there is no one around to judge, see us, and we can take off those masks. It's the time when you can indulge in those guilty pleasures that you would never admit to anybody else that you do, whether it be music that you like or films that you like. It could be dancing around your room. It could be wearing certain clothing. All these things that you would never admit to anybody else. And what Goffman said is the use of language, gestures and body language and props help us to pass as the type of person we want the people around us to see. This process requires us to constantly read the audience, read the people around us, to determine and adjust our performance accordingly. So we use all of the tools at our disposal to keep on top of an improvisation that is our daily interaction with others. And he said that there is a gap between who we really are and the roles we play, which he called role distance. So all of the roles that we play are loosely scripted by society, but we then choose how we play them. So again, it's like those improvisation shows where you're given a prompt or a start, and then you can go off and do whatever you like with that scene. Okay, so this symbolic interactionism view of society is saying that to understand society, we have to understand all of these processes and understand where they come from. But here we go with our evaluation. It's argued that this theory is more of an observation and a description than an explanation. It doesn't provide us with the origins behind the meanings. It doesn't provide us with how the shared meanings coexist. It just kind of tells us, well, this is how society is, rather than telling us why. It also doesn't explain where labels come from or the constant patterns of behavior within society. So why is it that that teacher determines that this child is troublesome? Why is it that certain behaviors lead to certain labels being attached? And finally, as I've said, it doesn't explain where the shared meanings come from. Why is it that 3 different people can look at the same behavior and say the same thing? How is that shared information disseminated? Now, Marxists would argue that the shared meanings are actually ruling class ideology and are transmitted through the superstructure of the society in order to maintain control over the working class. So but there is no, that's one suggestion. But this leads us on to our next idea, which is phenomenology and ethnomethodology. Now, to be clear here, you won't get a question just on phenomenology or ethnomethodology. It would be a combination question. There's not really enough here for a whole essay on it. You might get a 10 marker on it. Now, phenomenology is the work of Edmund Husserl and Alfred Schutz, and it is the study of how we make sense of the world. And Husserl says that the world only makes sense because we impose meaning on it and we impose order on it. The world is a product of the individual mind. We construct mental categories to classify and file information that we experience through each of our senses, and therefore there is no real shared, or there is no objective society. And he said that we use typifications to make sense of the world. And these are the shared categories that help us to organize these experiences and the world around us. They help to stabilize and clarify meanings by ensuring that we're all speaking the same language. And I don't mean that by literal language, I mean kind of the more symbolic language and the agreed meanings on things. So we use these typifications that we absorb from around us to make sense of a chaotic world. And he also talks about recipe knowledge. And this is this idea that we can interpret a situation, action, motivation without really thinking about it. And he uses the term recipe knowledge because if you do something enough times, like make a cake, you can do it without thinking. Like, I know I've baked cakes since I was old enough to hold a wooden spoon, and I can now, without thinking about it, bake a cake that's 8, 8 and 8, 8 flour, 8 sugar, 8 butter, 2 eggs, and I have my basic cake mix. I don't need to think about it. And that's what Husserl and Schultz were talking about is the fact that we are able to do this because we experience similar situations multiple times, whether that be through imitative play or role play growing up, or whether it be through our own life experiences. Now, Schultz developed Husserl's idea and applied it to the social world, and he states that the categories and concepts we use to construct our mental categories are not unique to ourselves, but are in fact shared with the other people around us, which is what makes us able to live in a society or a community. So these shared meanings are what he referred to as life world, the stock of shared typifications that are considered common sense knowledge, and it includes assumptions about the way things are and what certain situations mean. And we learn these through our interactions and our imitative play and things like that. Now, ethnomethodology is the work of Harold Garfinkel, and Garfinkel was interested in how social order is maintained. Unlike other interactionists who are interested in the effects of the meanings, he is interested in how people construct the common sense knowledge and the rules and processes we use to produce meanings in the first place. And he suggested that social order is created from this common sense knowledge of our everyday life. And he said that there are 2 ways that this common sense knowledge is created. The first is what he calls indexicality. And this is the idea that everything is dependent on context. So behaviors, actions, meanings, all of those things are dependent upon the context in which they are presented. So it could mean one thing in one scenario and something else in another scenario, but we need to understand those contexts in order to know how to respond. And he also talks about reflexicality, which is the use of common sense knowledge to interpret situations to construct a sense of meaning or order. So we have to be reflexive in our understanding and apply that common sense knowledge to the situation, action, or behavior in order to respond appropriately. And what he wanted to do is show this in reality and in action, and he conducted what has been referred to as breaching experiments. So what Garfinkel did was he got his students at university, when they went home for the break, I can't remember if it was Christmas break or summer break or what break it was, he set them into two groups. One group was to act like a lodger in their own home, acting as if the place was a hotel. So being overly polite, avoid getting personal, asking permissions, things like that. The other group, he asked them to haggle over the price of groceries at a supermarket, like you would perhaps on a market stall, but he wanted them to do it in a supermarket. And the idea of these experiments was to disrupt people's sense of order and challenge their reflexivity by undermining the assumption of the situation, and seeing how the people around his students went on to justify the behavior of the students. So he concluded that by challenging taken for granted assumptions, he was able to show that orderliness of everyday situations is not fixed, but accomplished through creating order. So those who were acting as lodgers or their home was a hotel, when asked why they thought the students behaved this way, they suggested that it was because that they don't feel that this is their home anymore. They feel like they've moved out. They lived away from home for a while. When it came to haggling in supermarkets, it was suggested maybe they're not from around here, maybe they come from somewhere else where haggling is a normal part of day-to-day behavior. However, Berger and Luckman argue that the world is an external reality once shared meanings have been created. So this idea of the world being the product of an individual mind only works so far. So once we have the shared meanings, the world becomes an external reality. And he uses the example of religion. Once religion is involved and people create their shared meanings of the world based around a religion, that world is external to the individual because they are taking that shared meaning from outside of their own experiences. Carib argues that the breaching experiments were trivial and uncovers nothing more than what we already knew. The taken for granted rules that we already knew were there. So it didn't really tell us anything. And the Marxists argue that the shared common sense knowledge, as we said before, is simply ruling class ideology. Now, obviously, the Marxists will always argue that, but that's beside the point. Okay, so that is what we mean when we talk about interactionism. It's the combination of these approaches that build upon each other to give us a deeper understanding of the world around us.